Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, we walk together into the forest, not quickly, not with any destination in mind, just slowly, beneath the trees, into the green and shadowed quiet where the air smells of moss and rain and old fallen leaves. Tonight is a collection of 100 small facts about the forest. Gentle things, quiet things, slow truths about trees and roots and fungi and soil, gathered together to carry you gently towards sleep. Forests cover roughly a third of all the land on Earth. Almost everywhere people have ever lived, there has been a forest somewhere nearby, or the memory of one, or the slow regrowth of one returning. They stretch across nearly every continent, from cold northern pine to warm, dripping jungle. And for most of human history, the forest was simply the edge of the known world, a place of shade, a place of shelter, a place where the light came down, softened and broken into pieces. And perhaps the first thing to notice, standing beneath the canopy, is how little light actually reaches the ground. In a dense forest, only a small fraction of the sunlight that strikes the treetops ever makes it all the way down. Sometimes only 1 or 2%. The rest is caught far above, gathered by millions of leaves, spread across the high green ceiling of the canopy. So the forest floor exists in a kind of permanent gentle dusk, even at noon, a cool, dim, underwater sort of light. That light moves. On a bright day, small patches of sun slip through gaps in the leaves and drift slowly across the ground as the wind shifts the canopy above. These moving patches are called sunflecks. For many of the small plants living on the forest floor, these brief passing moments of brightness provide much of the energy they receive all day. They wait in shadow, then catch the light as it drifts past, then return to waiting, a slow, patient rhythm of brightness and shade. The forest is built in layers. High above is the canopy, where the tallest trees spread their crowns and gather the sun. Below, that is the understory, a dimmer world of younger trees and shade-loving plants. And below that is the forest floor, soft with fallen leaves and slow decay. Each layer has its own air, its own light, its own quiet population of living things, stacked one above another like floors in a tall and very old building. And in the canopy, there is a strange and beautiful thing that happens between certain trees. If you lie on your back and look straight up, you can sometimes see it. The outermost branches of neighboring trees do not quite touch. They stop just short of one another, leaving thin, winding channels of open sky between their crowns, like rivers of light running through the green. This is called crown shyness. No one is entirely certain why it happens. Perhaps the branches wear against each other in the wind. Perhaps they sense the nearness of a neighbor and simply stop growing. But the result is a kind of gentle courtesy written across the roof of the forest. Trees are far older as a presence on earth than almost anything we think of as ancient. They have been growing for hundreds of millions of years, long before flowers, long before grass, long before any human walked beneath them. And some individual trees alive today are astonishingly old. The bristle cone pines of the high western mountains can live more than 4,000 years. Some are older than the pyramids. They grow slowly, twisted and weathered, in thin, cold air on rocky slopes, adding only the smallest amount of new wood each year. Their great age is not built on speed. It is built on patience. Inside every tree trunk is a record of that patience. If a tree is cut, you can see the rings, one for each year of its life. Wide rings mark years of warmth and plenty of rain. Narrow rings mark years of drought or cold. A dark scar might mark an old fire the tree survived. So a single cross-section of an ancient trunk holds a quiet diary of centuries, written in pale and dark circles. A record of every season the tree ever lived through, kept faithfully in the wood, and most of that wood is not actually alive. The heartwood at the center of a tree, the dense dark core that holds it upright, is made of cells that died long ago. Only a thin layer near the bark is truly living and growing. So a great tree is, in a way, mostly a monument to its own past, a living skin wrapped around the still, dead center of everything it used to be. It stands on the accumulated years of its own history. Beneath the bark, the tree is quietly moving water. Through the day, a single large tree can draw hundreds of liters of water up out of the soil, lift it the entire height of the trunk, and release it as vapor from its leaves. This is called transpiration. There is no pump and no heart inside a tree. The water is pulled upward by the simple act of evaporation at the leaves, each tiny escaping molecule tugging the next one up behind it. A continuous, silent thread of water rising from the dark soil all the way to the sky. And because so many trees are breathing out water at once, a forest creates its own weather. The moisture rising from a great forest gathers into clouds and falls again as rain, sometimes far away, carried on the wind. In the largest rainforests, rivers of invisible vapor flow through the sky, lifted from the leaves of billions of trees. The forest does not simply wait for rain in a quiet, patient way. The forest helps to make it. The green of the leaves comes from chlorophyll, the substance that lets a plant turn sunlight into food. Chlorophyll absorbs red and blue light and reflects green. And so the whole forest appears to us in countless shades of green, simply because that is the color the leaves do not use. The green we see is, in a sense, the light the forest had no need for, the leftover color scattered back to our eyes. In autumn, in the forests that change with the seasons, that green begins to fade as the days shorten and the cold draws near. The trees stop making chlorophyll and begin to draw their resources back into themselves. As the green breaks down, other colors that were hidden in the leaf all along are finally revealed. Yellows and oranges from pigments called carotenoids, which were there the whole summer, simply masked. And in some trees, deep reds and purples form fresh in the dying leaf. So, the famous colours of autumn are partly an unveiling and partly a last quiet flourish before the fall. And then the leaves let go. Deciduous trees drop their leaves to survive the winter, because broad, soft leaves would lose too much water in the frozen months and could be torn by snow. By shedding them, the tree seals itself, slows itself, and waits. The fallen leaves drift down through the still air and settle in soft layers on the ground. And there they begin their second life, slowly becoming soil. That layer of fallen leaves is called the leaf litter, and it is one of the most important things in the whole forest. It is a slow blanket of decay, where everything that falls is gradually taken apart and returned. Within it work countless small creatures, earthworms and springtails and tiny mites, pulling leaves down into the earth, chewing them into smaller and smaller pieces. A single handful of rich forest soil can hold billions of living microbes, more living things than there are people on Earth, all working quietly in the dark. And from this slow decay, the forest builds its soil. Forest soil is not simply dirt. It is made layer by layer, over centuries, from fallen leaves and fallen wood and the bodies of everything that ever lived and died beneath the trees. It holds water like a sponge. It stores vast amounts of carbon, more than the trees themselves in many forests, locked quietly underground. The richness we walk upon in an old wood is the patient work of 1,000 autumns, and running through that soil, almost everywhere, are threads, fine, pale threads, finer than hair, woven through the earth in uncountable numbers. These are the threads of fungi, and they are perhaps the strangest and most wonderful secret of the forest. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain several miles of these fungal threads tangled together, reaching through the dark. When we think of fungi, we usually think of mushrooms, but a mushroom is only the fruit. The real organism, the true body of the fungus, is the vast network of threads beneath the ground, called the mycelium. The mushroom that rises after rain is simply the part that comes up to release spores into the air. The way an apple is only a small part of the tree. Most of the fungus is always hidden, spread wide and silent beneath our feet. And these hidden networks are immense. The largest living organism on Earth is not a whale or a tree, but a single fungus, a honey fungus, growing in a forest in Oregon. Its threads spread through the soil across several square miles, and it is thought to be thousands of years old. One quiet, ancient, mostly invisible thing, woven through an entire forest, older than recorded history, and still slowly growing. The roots of trees and the threads of fungi meet underground and join together in a partnership older than the forests themselves. The fungus wraps around and even enters the tree's roots, and the two trade gifts. The fungus gathers water and minerals from far out in the soil and passes them to the tree. The tree, in return, gives the fungus sugars made from sunlight. Neither could thrive so well alone. This ancient bargain is called a mycorrhiza, and almost every tree in the forest depends upon it. And through these joined networks, trees are connected to one another. The fungal threads link the roots of many different trees together beneath the soil so that a whole forest can be quietly bound into a single living web. Scientists sometimes call it the wood wide web. Through these threads, trees can pass sugars and signals from one to another. A large, old tree can send food through the network to a small seedling struggling in the shade, the way an elder might quietly feed a child. These large, old trees are sometimes called mother trees. Standing at the center of the network with the most connections, they nourish the young trees growing up around them, including their own offspring. When a mother tree is dying, it has even been observed passing its resources out through the network into the trees nearby, releasing what it has gathered over a long life back into the forest so that nothing is wasted and the forest goes on and the network carries warnings as well as food. When a tree is attacked by insects, it can release chemical signals, and through the air and through the fungal threads, nearby trees receive the message. They begin to prepare their own defenses before the insects ever reach them, raising the levels of bitter compounds in their leaves. So, a forest is not a crowd of strangers. It is something closer to a community, quietly speaking to itself in a language of chemistry, beneath the threshold of our senses. The fungi do more than connect. They are also the great recyclers of the forest, the ones who take everything apart. When a tree falls, it is the fungi, more than anything else, who slowly unmake it. They are among the few living things that can break down wood itself, the tough fibers that hold a tree upright for centuries. Without fungi, the fallen trees of the world would simply pile up, the nutrients locked inside them forever. Because of fungi, the forest can use the same material again and again, endlessly. Death feeding new life. And some of these fungi glow in certain damp forests. On rotting wood, there is a soft and eerie green light that appears in the dark. It comes from bioluminescent fungi, glowing quietly on the decaying logs. People once called it foxfire or fairy fire. It is faint enough that you must let your eyes adjust to see it, a low, cold glow in the blackness of the night woods, as though the forest floor were keeping a few small embers of light alive in the dark. Lichens, too, are a kind of partnership. The pale crusts and soft tufts you see growing on bark and stone are not a single organism, but two living together as one. A fungus provides the structure and shelter, and within it lives an alga, which makes food from sunlight. Together, they can survive in places neither could endure alone. On bare rock, on dead branches, in cold and exposed places. Some lichens grow so slowly, only a fraction of a millimeter a year, that a patch the size of a hand may be hundreds of years old, and there are fungi that fruit entirely underground and are never seen at all unless something digs them up. Truffles grow in the soil among the roots of certain trees, and they fill the air around them with a powerful scent, so that animals will find them, eat them, and carry their spores away. The whole strategy of the truffle is built on smell, on being delicious and hidden, on persuading a passing creature to do the work, of spreading its children through the forest. Close to the ground, softer than anything, grows the moss. Moss is among the oldest of all land plants, a survivor from a time more than 400 million years ago, when the first green things were only beginning to creep out of the water and onto the bare stone of the world. Moss was there near the very beginning, and it has changed remarkably little since. To touch moss is to touch one of the most ancient living designs on earth. Moss has no roots. It does not drink through the ground the way a tree does. Instead, it absorbs water directly through its tiny leaves, soaking up rain and mist across its whole surface. Like a green sponge, and because it has no inner plumbing, no vessels to carry water up a stem, moss must stay small and close to the damp. It cannot grow tall. It can only spread softly over stone and bark and fallen wood. A low green carpet on the floor of the wood, and moss can endure remarkable things. In dry times, many mosses simply pause. They lose almost all their water, turn brown and brittle, and seem entirely dead. But they are not. They are only waiting. When the rain returns, within minutes, they drink it in and turn green again and carry on living. as though nothing had happened. A patch of moss can survive being dried out many times over and revive again each time, holding on to life through patience rather than struggle. One kind of moss, the sphagnum that grows in cold, wet bogs, can hold many times its own weight in water. It soaks up the rain and keeps the ground saturated and acidic. And in these conditions, things decay very slowly, over thousands of years. The dead moss piles up faster than it can rot, forming deep, soft layers of peat. Whole landscapes are built this way, slowly, out of moss that never quite finished dying. And within the moss lives a hidden world of creatures, so small we rarely think of them. Among the most remarkable are the tardigrades, sometimes called water bears, tiny, eight-legged animals smaller than a grain of sand that live in the film of water around the moss leaves. They are nearly indestructible. They can survive being frozen, boiled, dried out completely, and even the emptiness of space. In a patch of moss no bigger than your palm, thousands of these tiny, patient creatures may be living out their slow and durable lives. As the seasons turn, the forest changes its whole character. In early spring, before the great trees overhead have opened their leaves, the forest floor enjoys a brief season of light, and the small plants of the floor rush to use it. These are the spring ephemerals, the wild flowers that bloom early and fast, carpeting the ground in white and yellow and blue, while the sun still reaches down. Then, as the canopy fills in above and the shade returns, they fade and vanish, having lived their whole flowering life in those few bright weeks. In spring, too, the sap rises as the cold loosens its grip. The trees begin moving sugar and water up from their roots into their waking branches, and in some trees, like the maples, this rising sap is sweet. People have learned to tap it, to take a little of that spring tide of sweetness and boil it down into syrup. It takes a great deal of sap to make a little syrup, dozens of liters reduced to one, the concentrated sweetness of a whole forest's awakening. In summer, the forest is at its fullest, deep green and humming with life and heavy with shade. In autumn, it lets go, the leaves colouring and falling, the creatures storing food, the whole wood preparing. And in winter, the deciduous forest goes quiet and bare, the trees dormant, their growth halted, their sap withdrawn, simply standing through the cold and waiting, as they have waited through countless winters before, for the light to return. And the trees standing through that winter are doing more for us than we usually realize. Through photosynthesis, the trees take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, the very air we breathe. A great share of the oxygen in the world has passed, at some point, through the leaves of plants and trees. Every breath you take tonight is, in part, a gift from forests, an exchange between your lungs and the leaves, quietly continuing, whether we notice it or not. A single large tree can take in a meaningful amount of carbon dioxide over a year and lock that carbon away inside its wood, where it may remain for centuries. An old forest full of great old trees and deep, rich soil holds an enormous store of carbon, gathered slowly out of the air across hundreds of years and kept quietly in trunk and root and earth. The oldest forests are among the largest stores of carbon on the land, and the forest gives us something gentler too, something we breathe without seeing. Trees release into the air a class of compounds called phytoncides, oils that help defend them against insects and disease. We breathe these in when we walk among the trees, and they appear to calm us, to lower our stress, to ease the body. In some countries, walking slowly through a forest for its own sake has become a recognized practice for health, sometimes called forest bathing. The forest, it seems, is good for us in ways older and deeper than we can fully explain. There is even a name for the smell that rises after rain in the woods. It is called petrichor, and part of it comes from a substance called geosmin, made by tiny bacteria living in the soil. Our noses are extraordinarily sensitive to it. We can detect geosmin in amounts so small that almost nothing else registers, as though the human body were tuned somewhere deep in its history to notice the smell of damp earth and coming rain, that rich, dark. After the rain scent of the forest floor is the smell of the soil itself, quietly breathing. The wind moves differently through different trees. Through the broad leaves of summer, it makes a soft, rushing hiss. But through the needles of pines, it makes a deeper, longer sound, a low sighing that people have listened to for thousands of years. There is an old word for it: soughing, the sound of wind moving through pine. On a still night in a pine forest, that long, slow breath of the wind through the needles can be one of the most peaceful sounds in the world, rising and falling like the breathing of something vast and asleep. And in the dark, the forest does not stop. It changes hands as the daytime creatures settle and quiet. The night shift comes awake, and a whole hidden population begins to move through the trees. The forest at night is not empty. It is simply busy with different lives, ones built for the dark, moving softly where we cannot easily see. Among the great hunters of the night, woods is the owl, and the owl is built for silence. The leading edges of its wing feathers are softened and fringed, so that the air passes over them without the rush and beat that other birds make. An owl can fly almost perfectly silently, drifting through the black trees without a sound, so that the small creature below never hears it coming. To the mouse on the forest floor, the owl arrives out of pure quiet, and the owl hears what we cannot. Many owls have ears set unevenly on their heads, one slightly higher than the other, so that a sound reaches one ear a fraction of an instant before the other. From that tiny difference, the owl can map exactly where a sound is coming, from in complete darkness, pinpointing the faint rustle of a mouse beneath the leaves, or even beneath the snow. It hunts by listening, building a picture of the world out of the smallest sounds. Through the same darkness fly the bats, and they navigate by sound in a different way. A bat sends out high cries, far above the range of our hearing, and listens for the echoes returning. From those echoes, it builds a detailed picture of everything around it, every branch, every moth, every gap between the trees, all in total darkness. This is called echolocation, seeing with sound, and it lets the bat thread through the night forest at speed and catch tiny flying insects out of the air. Bats do quiet good for the forest as they hunt. A single small bat can eat many hundreds, even thousands of insects in one night, keeping the forest's balance through the dark hours. And in warmer forests, some bats drink nectar and carry pollen from flower to flower in the night, just as bees do by day, so that some trees depend on bats to make their fruit. The bat passing overhead in the dusk is part of how the forest renews itself. The moths fly with them and the moths are the night's pollinators, while the bees sleep. Moths visit the pale night-blooming flowers, drawn by scent more than by sight, and carry pollen between them in the dark. Many flowers that open only at night are pale or white, the better to be found by moonlight, and heavy with fragrance, calling to the moths through the air. There is a whole quiet economy of pollination that happens only after dark, unseen, between the moths and the flowers that wait for them. And on certain summer nights, the darkness fills with small living lights. Fireflies rise from the grass and the low branches and drift through the trees, each one glowing and fading, glowing and fading, signaling to others of its kind. Their light is cold light, made by a chemical reaction in their bodies that wastes almost no energy as heat, far more efficient than any lamp we have ever built. Whole stretches of forest can sparkle with them on a warm night, a slow, silent constellation moving among the trees. There are birds that belong wholly to the dusk and the dark, like the nightjars, who rest unseen on the forest floor through the day, perfectly camouflaged against the dead leaves, and rise at twilight to fly with open mouths through clouds of insects. Their soft churring calls roll through the evening woods, a sound so steady and strange it seems almost mechanical, part of the deep, quiet voice of the forest at night. By day, other workers move through the trees. The woodpecker hammers at the bark, drumming with astonishing speed and force to find insects beneath, or to dig a nest, or simply to announce itself to the forest. And the woodpecker can do this without harming itself, because its skull is specially built, cushioned and reinforced, with bone arranged to absorb the shock of every blow. It strikes thousands of times a day, and it never grows dizzy, never aches. The whole head is a quiet marvel of design. The squirrels are the forest's foresters, though they do not know it. In autumn, a squirrel buries far more nuts and seeds than it will ever return to eat, hiding them across the whole forest floor against the coming winter. And the ones it forgets, and it forgets a great many, are left buried in the soil exactly where a seed needs to be. So squirrels plant trees by accident, season after season, scattering and burying the next forest while only meaning to feed themselves. The jays do the same with acorns. A single jay can gather and bury thousands of acorns in one autumn, carrying them away from the parent oak and pushing them into the soil far and wide. The acorns it never recovers grow into new oaks, often far from where they began. Across long stretches of time, whole oak forests have spread across the land on the wings of jays. The trees and the birds, bound together, each depending on the other. Beavers shape the forest in a larger way by felling trees and building their dams across streams. Beavers slow the water and spread it out, flooding low ground and creating ponds and wetlands where there was only a narrow stream before. These wetlands become home to fish and frogs and insects and birds, a whole new richness of life. A single family of beavers working quietly through the nights can change the shape of a valley and the course of its water. And the largest hunters can shape a forest from the top down, where wolves return to a wild land. They change the behavior of the deer and elk, who can no longer graze carelessly in the open. The young trees along the rivers, no longer eaten down, grow tall again. The riverbanks hold firm. The birds and beavers return. The presence of a few predators ripples all the way down to the shape of the land itself. This is called a trophic cascade, and it is one of the quiet astonishments of how a forest holds together. Down in the damp leaf litter live the salamanders, soft and secret creatures of the wet shade. Many of them have no lungs at all. They breathe entirely through their moist skin, taking in air directly through the surface of their bodies, and so they must stay damp always, hidden beneath logs and leaves and stones. In some forests, the small salamanders are so numerous that, all together, they outweigh every bird and mammal in the wood. A vast hidden multitude living quietly in the wet dark. The slugs and the snails are part of the forest's slow cleaning crew, gliding over the damp ground at night and after rain, grazing on rotting leaves and fungi, and helping to break the litter down. They move on a single muscular foot, on a film of their own slime, slowly, patiently, leaving silver trails across the dark wood. Nothing about them is in a hurry. They are the very emblem of the forest's unhurried pace. And the ants are everywhere, though we rarely notice their numbers. In many forests, The combined weight of all the ants is greater than the combined weight of all the larger animals put together. They carry seeds and bury them, turn and aerate the soil, clear away the dead, and tend small herds of aphids for their sweet secretions. The forest floor is threaded with their trails and tunnels, an immense and ancient civilization underfoot, going about its work in numbers beyond counting. The great northern forest, the boreal forest, the taiga, is the largest forest on earth, a vast belt of spruce and pine and fir that wraps almost all the way around the top of the world. It runs across the north of America and Europe and Asia in an unbroken green ring through some of the coldest inhabited country on the planet. For much of the year it lies under snow, silent and dark, the trees standing close and narrow, shaped to shed the weight of the snow from their branches. Those northern trees are mostly evergreen, and there is a reason. Keeping their needles through the winter lets them begin photosynthesizing the moment. The light and warmth return, without spending the short summer growing new leaves first. The needles themselves are narrow and waxy, built to hold water and to endure the cold and the wind. In a place where the growing season is brief, the evergreen's patience, holding its leaves through everything, is exactly what allows it to survive. Far to the south, the tropical rainforests are the opposite kind of place, warm and wet all year, dripping and dense and almost unimaginably full of life, though they cover only a small part of the Earth's surface. The rainforests are home to more than half of all the species of plants and animals on land. A single tree in the rainforest may hold more kinds of insect than live in an entire forest in the cold north. It is the richest, most crowded living place on land. A riot of green stacked from the ground to the high canopy. In the rainforest, the trees grow so tall and the canopy so dense that the world below is a deep green twilight, and the competition for light is fierce. The tallest trees of all, the emergents, push their crowns up above the rest into the open sun, standing alone above the canopy like islands above a green sea. Some of them rise the height of a tall building, holding their leaves up in the bright air, while everything below them waits in shade. And in that competition for light, some plants give up on the ground entirely. The epiphytes grow not in the soil, but high on the branches of other trees, perched in the canopy where the light is, gathering water and nutrients from the rain and the air, and the debris that collects around them. Orchids and bromeliads and ferns live this way, whole gardens flowering high above the forest floor, rooted in nothing but bark and mist. Some of these high-living plants catch and hold their own small pools of water. Certain bromeliads form a tight rosette of leaves that gathers rainwater in its center. A little pond cupped in the branches far above the ground, and in these tiny pools, whole small worlds appear. Insects, tiny frogs, even creatures that spend their entire lives in that one cup of water in the canopy, never once touching the earth so far below. There is a tree in the rainforest that begins its life in the canopy and grows downward. The strangler fig starts as a seed dropped high on a branch by a bird. It sends roots creeping down the trunk of its host tree toward the soil, and as it grows, it wraps and tightens around the host, sending down more and more roots, until at last the original tree dies within the fig's woven cage, and the fig stands hollow and strong where the other tree used to be. A slow embrace that lasts a lifetime, and to stand upright in the thin, wet soil of the rainforest. Some of the giant trees grow great, flaring buttress roots, wide, flat walls of root that spread out from the base of the trunk like the fins of a rocket, bracing the towering tree against the wind. These roots can grow taller than a person, winding away across the forest floor, and between them are shaded hollows where small animals shelter. The tree solves the problem of its own great height by widening its feet. Among the giants is the kapok tree, one of the tallest of the rainforest, which rises far above the canopy and spreads an enormous crown in the open sky. Its branches become whole, hanging gardens of other plants, and countless creatures live their lives in its single vast structure, from the roots to the highest leaves. A great rainforest tree is not really one life, but the home of thousands. A living city standing alone above the green. In the rainforest, almost nothing reaches the ground unused. The leaves and fruit and dead wood that fall are broken down with astonishing speed in the warm, wet air, and the nutrients are taken up again almost at once by the waiting roots. So The richness of the rainforest is not in its soil, which is often surprisingly thin and poor, but in the living things themselves, in the endless, rapid cycle of growth and death and growth again. The forest holds its treasure in its bodies, not its ground. When a great tree finally falls in any forest, it tears a hole in the canopy, and light pours down to the floor. For the first time in perhaps a century, and the forest answers, seeds that have waited dormant in the soil for years suddenly find their moment. Young trees that have been growing slowly in the shade, biding their time, surge upward toward the new opening. The death of one giant becomes a sudden festival of growth, a race for the light in the gap it leaves behind. And the fallen tree itself does not stop giving. As it lies on the forest floor and slowly rots, it becomes what is called a nurse log. Moss covers it, fungi thread through it, and seedlings take root along its length, drawing nourishment from the soft, decaying wood. You can sometimes see a perfectly straight row of young trees growing up out of the forest floor, all in a line, marking exactly where an old, fallen trunk once lay, long after the log itself has melted back into the earth. Some seeds will not grow at all until something extraordinary happens to them. Certain pine cones are sealed shut with resin and will only open in the heat of a fire, releasing their seeds onto the fresh, bare ground exactly when the competition has been cleared away and the ash has enriched the soil. These trees do not merely survive fire. They depend on it. They have folded the disaster into their own way of living, and they wait, sometimes for years, for the flames that will finally let their children grow. And some seeds must pass through an animal before they can grow at all. They are eaten with the fruit, carried in the animal's body far from the parent tree, and dropped to the ground in a new place, already softened and fertilized and ready to sprout. The bright, sweet fruit of the forest is, in a sense, a kind of payment, an offering made by the tree to any creature willing to carry its seeds away. The whole arrangement is ancient, a quiet bargain between the trees and the animals. That move among them, oaks and beeches and other great seed-bearing trees do a strange thing. Across the years, they do not produce the same amount of seed every season. Instead, every few years, many trees together suddenly produce an enormous crop of acorns, or nuts all at once, far more than the animals can possibly eat. These are called mast years. By overwhelming the forest with seed in some years and offering almost none in others, the trees make sure that at least some of their seed survives uneaten to grow. And no one fully understands how the trees across whole regions manage to agree. The aspen has perhaps the strangest way of being many and one at the same time. A whole grove of aspen, hundreds or even thousands of trunks, can in fact be a single living organism. All the trees connected underground by one shared root system, all genetically identical, all sprung from a single original seed. One famous aspen grove is thought to be one of the oldest and heaviest living things on Earth. A single organism that has been quietly spreading and renewing itself for many thousands of years. What looks like a forest is, in truth, one being, a tree growing up in the shade of its elders practices a deep patience. A young tree on the dim forest floor may grow only a little each year, waiting, sometimes for decades, for an old tree to fall and let the light through. It puts on slow, dense, narrow rings, holding itself ready, surviving on very little, and then, when its moment comes and the gap opens above, it is ready to rise. Some of the greatest trees in the forest spent their first century simply waiting in the dark. The roots of a tree spread far wider than we tend to. Imagine the roots of many trees reach out well beyond the spread of the branches above, a vast, shallow web threading through the upper soil, searching for water and holding the great weight of the tree against the wind. Beneath a quiet forest floor, the ground is woven through with roots in every direction, the trees gripping the earth and one another, a hidden architecture as great as the forest we can see. And the roots hold the land itself together. The fine web of roots beneath a forest binds the soil, holds the hillsides in place, and slows the rain as it sinks into the ground. Where forests stand, the water is held and released slowly. The streams run clear, and the earth stays where it is. The forest is not only a collection of trees, it is the quiet keeper of the soil and the water, of the whole land around it. Trees cool the air around them, and not only with their shade, as they release water vapor from their leaves. That evaporation draws heat out of the air, the same way sweat cools our skin. A grove of trees on a hot day can be many degrees cooler than the open ground nearby. Not just dimmer, but genuinely, measurably cooler. The whole forest gently lowering the temperature of the air through the patient breathing of its leaves. In the soft soil of the forest, water moves slowly and gathers in hidden ways. Springs rise where the ground releases what it has stored, feeding the small streams that wind through the trees. The water that falls as rain on a forest may spend a long time in the soil and the roots and the slow seep of the ground before it ever reaches a stream. The forest is, among everything else, a great slow reservoir, holding the rain and letting it go gently, long after the clouds have passed. The tallest living things on earth are trees. The coast, redwoods, which can rise well past 100 meters into the air, taller than almost any building most of us will ever stand beside. To lift water to the very top of such a tree is near the limit of what is physically possible. The thin column of water stretched almost to breaking as it rises. These trees live for many centuries, wrapped in coastal fog, and their highest branches hold whole communities of plants and animals that may never come down to the ground. And the largest living thing by sheer volume is also a tree, a giant sequoia with a trunk so vast that it holds an almost unimaginable quantity of wood. These trees are not the tallest, but they are the most massive, broad and ancient and fire-scarred. Their thick, spongy bark protecting them from the flames that pass through their groves. They have stood for thousands of years, growing a little larger each season, slowly becoming the greatest single living things our world has ever grown. That thick bark is itself a quiet defense, built up over a lifetime. Bark protects the living tree from fire and frost and insects and disease, a tough outer shield around the soft growing layer beneath. In the fire-prone forests, the bark of the oldest trees can grow remarkably thick, soft and fibrous and slow to burn, so that the flames pass over the trunk and move on, and the tree lives, scarred but standing, for another 100 years. Every great old trunk is wrapped in its own long history of survival, and inside the tree, the work of carrying life up and down never stops. Just beneath the bark runs the phloem, carrying sugars made in the leaves down to feed the roots and the trunk. And deeper in runs the xylem, carrying water and minerals up from the roots to the leaves. Two slow streams flowing in opposite directions inside the same standing trunk, all day and all night, all year, the quiet circulation of a tree, moving without a sound. Wood itself, the substance the whole forest is built from, is mostly made out of air. It seems impossible, but it is true. The bulk of a tree's solid wood comes from carbon, and that carbon is drawn out of the air, out of the carbon dioxide the leaves take in, and woven into the body of the tree. A great trunk is, in a real sense, sunlight and air made solid, gathered slowly out of the sky and held in place for centuries. The forest is built from the very air we breathe. When you walk into a forest, the temperature steadies and the air grows still. The trees break the wind and hold the moisture, and even out the warmth, so that the air beneath the canopy is calmer, damper, and more constant than the open land outside. Step from a sunlit field into the trees, and you feel it at once. The hush, the cool, the settling of the air, as though you had stepped indoors into a vast green room. And sound, too, behaves differently in the forest. The trees and the soft floor absorb and scatter noise, so that the forest is quieter than the open country. The sharp sounds of the world muffled and softened among the trunks and leaves. What sounds remain are gentle ones, the wind in the leaves, the distant water, the small movements of birds. The forest is one of the quietest places left, a natural muffling of the noise of everything else. In autumn, before the cold, the animals of the forest prepare in their own ways. Some grow thick coats and stay. Some bury food against the lean months ahead, and some sleep through the whole of winter. The dormouse and the bear and others slow their bodies almost to, stopping, their hearts beating slow, their breath shallow, their warmth low, drifting through the cold months in a deep sleep, living off the fat they gathered all the autumn, waiting out the winter in the dark. The deer move quietly through the dawn and the dusk. The in-between hours, grazing at the edges of the trees and slipping back into cover. They are creatures of the soft light, neither full day nor full night, and a forest at dawn is often full of them, stepping lightly through the mist, lifting their heads, listening, then lowering them again to feed. To come upon a deer standing still in the early forest is to feel for a moment the deep, quiet alertness of the wild. And the fox moves through the night and the edges of the day, soft-footed and watchful, hunting the small creatures of the undergrowth. In the dark forest, the fox listens for the faint sounds beneath the leaves and pounces, light and precise. It knows the forest as a map of scent and sound, a world we can barely perceive, and it moves through that world with a quiet confidence, at home in the dark among the trees. The badger digs its home deep beneath the roots, a great winding burrow called a set that may be used by many generations, dug and added to over decades, even centuries. Below the quiet floor of the wood, there are whole tunnels and chambers worn smooth by the passing of countless animals. An underground dwelling, older than any human house nearby, inhabited and re-inhabited through the long, slow years of the forest. High in the trees, birds build their nests with extraordinary care, weaving together twigs and moss and grass and spider silk into snug cups and domes and hanging baskets, each kind of bird to its own ancient design. Some line their nests with feathers and soft down for warmth. Some disguise them so well against the bark that they all but vanish. The forest in spring is full of these small, careful homes, hidden among the leaves, each one holding the next generation of the wood. Many forest birds sing most strongly at the very first light of day, in the great wave of sound called the dawn chorus, in the cool, still air before sunrise. The songs carry farthest, and one bird after another wakes and adds its voice until the whole forest is ringing. It rises and swells with the light and then settles as the day comes on. For anyone who has woken in a forest at dawn, that slow gathering tide of birdsong is something never quite forgotten. The colours of birds and butterflies in the forest are sometimes not colours at all, in the ordinary sense. The brilliant blues and greens of many wings are made not by pigment, but by structure, by tiny ridges and layers that bend the light and scatter back only certain colours. The shimmering blue of some butterflies has no blue in it at all. It is pure light, shaped by the architecture of the wing. So, some of the most dazzling colors in the forest are, in truth, made of nothing but the way light bends. The spider's web strung between the branches is a marvel of quiet engineering. The silk a spider spins is, for its weight, stronger than steel, and the spider draws it out of its own body and weaves it into a near invisible net to catch the insects of the forest. In the early morning, when the dew settles on the threads, you can suddenly see them everywhere. Hundreds of webs hung with water, glittering between the trees. A hidden architecture revealed for an hour by the light. The conifers, the cone-bearing trees, are among the most ancient lineages in the whole forest. They carry their seeds not in fruit, but bear upon the scales of their cones, a design far older than the flowering trees, stretching back to a time before flowers existed at all. The pines and spruces and firs of the northern woods are the inheritors of a way of growing that has endured, almost unchanged in its essentials, for hundreds of millions of years. To stand in a pine forest is to stand among one of the oldest ideas in the living world, and the cones themselves are quietly alive to the weather. A pine cone opens and closes depending on the moisture in the air. In dry weather, its scales spread wide to release the seeds to the wind. In damp weather, they close up tight again. A fallen cone on the forest floor will go on opening and closing long after it has left the tree, breathing slowly with the changing humidity. A small wooden weather vane lying among the needles. One tree has come down to us almost unchanged from the age of the dinosaurs. The ginkgo, with its small fan-shaped leaves, is a living fossil, the last survivor of a family of trees that is over 200 million years old. The ginkgos that grow in parks and gardens today are nearly identical to the ones that grew when great reptiles walked beneath them. It is one of the oldest kinds of tree still living, a single green thread reaching unbroken across an almost unimaginable depth of time. Another tree was known only from fossils and thought to have vanished from the earth entirely, until it was discovered still growing, alive, in a remote valley. The dawn redwood had been found in ancient stone, named as something long extinct, and then found living after all. Its small population quietly surviving when no one had thought to look. A tree counted among the dead walking out of the fossil record and into the present. Still here, the yew is among the longest lived of all trees, and the oldest yews may be thousands of years old. So old and so slow that their true age is hard to measure, for the heartwood that would carry the count has long since rotted away. They grow in the quiet corners of the world, dark and dense and slow, and a single yew may have been standing, green and alive, since long before the buildings and the histories that now surround it. They are among the patient elders of the living world. The birch wears a pale and papery bark, bright against the dark of the wood, that peels away in thin sheets. That whiteness reflects the sun and helps protect the slender tree from the heat, and the bark itself is so tough and waterproof that people have used it for thousands of years to make vessels and shelters and even boats. The bark resists rot long after the wood within has gone, so that you may sometimes find a hollow white tube of birch bark lying in the forest. The tree inside it long since returned to the soil. The bark of the cork oak is so thick and soft and light that it can be carefully stripped away without harming the tree. And then, slowly, over years, the tree simply grows it back. This is the cork we know, harvested again and again across the long life of a single tree. The same oak giving up its bark every decade or so, for a century or more, and healing and growing it once again. Many trees defend themselves with chemistry held inside their wood and bark. The oak is rich in bitter compounds called tannins, which discourage the insects and animals that would eat it, and which people have long used to cure leather. Other trees fill their wood with fragrant resins and oils that repel the creatures that would bore into them. The cedar's sweet, aromatic scent, which we find so pleasant, is in truth a quiet poison to the insects that might otherwise destroy it. Much of what we love about the smell of wood is a tree's defense, breathing out into the air, and the forests have given us flavors we rarely connect with the trees that made them. Cinnamon is the inner bark of a tree, peeled and dried until it curls. Cloves are the dried flower buds of a forest tree. The spices that have moved across the world and shaped its history are so many of them. Simply the bark and buds and seeds of trees that grow in warm and distant forests. Their powerful flavors first evolved not for us, but to protect the tree Even chocolate begins in the shade of the rainforest. The cacao tree grows beneath the canopy, and its fruit grows in strange pods directly from the trunk, and the older branches, holding the seeds we have learned to ferment and roast into chocolate. The tree depends on tiny midges to pollinate its small flowers, insects most people have never heard of, without which there would be no chocolate at all. A whole sweetness of the world rests on a midge in the rainforest shade. Some forest trees are bound so tightly to a single partner that neither can live without the other. Every kind of fig tree has its own kind of tiny wasp, and only that wasp can pollinate that fig. And the wasp, in turn, can breed nowhere else but inside that fig. The two have grown up together across millions of years, each shaped entirely to the other. A partnership so close that the fall of one would mean the fall of the other. And the figs they make feed countless birds and monkeys and bats, so that on this one secret bond between a tree and a wasp, a great web of forest life depends. The Brazil nut tree shows the same deep web of need. It can be pollinated only by certain large, wild bees strong enough to force their way into its flowers, and its hard, heavy seed pods can be opened in the wild by only a few animals. Chief among them, a small ground creature called the agouti, which gnaws them open and buries the seeds. Without the bee and without the agouti, the great tree cannot reproduce. It stands only where the whole forest around it still stands intact. Down on the floor, in the damp shade, grow the ferns, and the ferns are far older than any flower or any cone. They were among the great plants of the ancient world, and they reproduce in an old way, not by seed, but by spores, fine dust released from the underside of their fronds. In spring, the new fronds rise tightly coiled, curled like the head of a violin, and slowly unfurl, opening out into the air. That spiral of the unfurling fern is one of the oldest shapes in the living world. In the deep past, ferns and their relatives grew into vast swamp forests, far larger than any fern today. And when those forests died and fell and were buried and pressed beneath the earth for many millions of years, they slowly became coal. The coal we have burned to build the modern world is, in truth, the buried body of ancient forests, sunlight gathered by trees that lived before the dinosaurs, locked underground for an almost endless span of time. To burn coal is to release the light of a forest that died before there were any eyes to see it. The resin that trees bleed to seal their wounds can also become a kind of memory when sticky resin oozes from an ancient tree and traps an insect, and then is buried and hardened over millions of years. It becomes amber, and inside that amber, the small creature is held perfectly, every leg and wing intact, exactly as it was on the day it was caught, a single instant of a forest's life preserved unchanged. Across an unimaginable depth of years, a drop of a tree's slow blood, holding a moment forever. Trees scatter their seeds in ingenious ways. The maple wraps its seeds in thin papery wings, and when they fall, they spin, whirling like tiny helicopters, carried away from the parent tree on the wind. Other trees send out seeds wrapped in down and fluff, drifting on the air like snow, traveling far before they settle. The forest cannot move, and so it has learned 100 ways to send its children, traveling in its place, on the wind, in the water, in the bodies of animals, a way to find their own patch of light. Some insects measure their lives against the slow time of the forest in astonishing ways. There are cicadas that spend many years underground as larvae, feeding quietly on the roots of trees in the dark. And then, all together, after 13 or 17 years, they emerge into the light in their countless thousands, sing for a few brief weeks, mate, and die, leaving the next brood to begin its long wait underground. They keep a calendar measured in the slow years of the trees, and the forest fills suddenly with their sound. Once in a generation, in the warm forests, there is a creature that has surrendered entirely to slowness. The sloth moves so little and so slowly that algae grows in the grooves of its fur, tinting it green and helping to hide it among the leaves. It comes down from its tree only rarely. It digests its food over many days. Everything about it is unhurried to a degree that seems almost impossible. An animal that has made a successful life out of doing almost nothing at all, hanging quietly in the canopy, moving like a branch in the wind. In the great rainforests, the largest animals are quiet gardeners. The forest elephants walk slow paths through the trees, eating fruit and carrying the seeds far away in their bodies, dropping them, ready to grow across miles of forest. They are among the few creatures large enough to swallow and spread the biggest seeds of all, and many great trees depend on them entirely. Where the elephants walk, the forest is planted. They are, in a real sense, the gardeners of the wood, shaping the forest with every slow step. And among the smaller workers, some are farmers. The leaf cutter ants carry pieces of leaf, far larger than themselves, in long, winding processions back to their nests. But they do not eat the leaves. They use them to grow a fungus deep in their underground gardens. And it is the fungus they feed upon. They have been farming in this way for many millions of years, far longer than humans, tending a single crop in the dark, a whole quiet agriculture beneath the forest floor. The termites are the great unmakers of fallen wood in the warm forests, and they can eat wood because of the tiny creatures living inside their own bodies. In their guts live multitudes of microbes that break down the tough fibers of the wood into something the termite can use. A partnership hidden within a partnership. Together, the termites and their inner companions return uncountable fallen trees to the soil and build their great mounds, and quietly keep the forest's slow cycle of decay and renewal turning. When a single mushroom rises and opens, it releases its spores in numbers almost beyond meaning. A large mushroom can let go of billions of spores, drifting away on the faintest movement of the air, so fine and so light that they travel for miles, even high into the clouds. The air of the forest is always full of them, a silent, invisible drift of spores, settling everywhere, waiting for the one damp, dark corner where each might grow. The whole forest is quietly seeding the air it breathes. In the cold northern forests, through the long winter, the reindeer and the caribou dig down through the snow to feed on lichen, one of the few foods that endures beneath the frozen months. The slow growing lichen, which takes so many years to spread across a stone or a branch, becomes the quiet sustenance that carries great herds through the dark of winter. The patience of the lichen feeds the long migrations of the deer, and beneath the winter snow itself, There is a hidden world that stays alive where the snow lies deep. It forms a blanket, and the ground beneath it stays warmer than the bitter air above. In that sheltered space between the snow and the soil, small creatures like voles tunnel and feed, and go about their lives all winter long in a dim and quiet world of their own, roofed over with snow, hidden from the cold and from the hunters above. The forest holds life, even in the deepest part of the year, even where we would think nothing could survive. In some forests, the trees drink the fog. Along certain coasts, the great redwoods stand wrapped in sea mist, and they comb the water straight out of the fog with their needles, so that it gathers and drips down to the ground below, like a slow rain falling from the trees on a day with no rain at all. In the dry season, much of the water these giant trees receive comes not from the sky as rain, but from the fog they catch themselves, watering their own roots out of the passing cloud. A dead tree, standing or fallen, is one of the most alive places in the whole forest. A standing dead trunk, soft with decay and riddled with holes, becomes a home for more creatures than it ever held in life. Woodpeckers carve out hollows in it, and when they move on, those hollows shelter owls and small birds and bats and countless insects. The rotting wood feeds the fungi and the beetles, and they in turn feed the birds. In a healthy forest, the dead trees are as precious as the living, and a wood with no old fallen timber is a poorer place. For it, the woodpecker that carves those hollows carries a hidden marvel inside its head. Its tongue is so long that, when not in use, it wraps all the way around the back of the skull, coiled up over the top of the head and anchored near the base of the beak. The bird unrolls this extraordinary tongue, barbed and sticky at the tip, to reach deep into the wood and draw out insects from their tunnels. A whole tongue coiled inside a skull, longer than the head that holds it. Other birds work the trunks in their own ways. The nuthatch walks straight down the bark head first, as easily as other birds walk up, seeing the tree from an angle no one else does. The tree creeper spirals slowly up the trunk, searching the bark for hidden insects, then drops to the base of the next tree and spirals up again. Each has found its own quiet niche on the surface of the trees, a different way of reading the same bark. In the warm forests, the great-billed hornbills and the bright toucans are among the forest's busiest. Planters, they swallow fruit whole and carry the seeds far away inside them, scattering the trees of the forest across great distances as they fly. Their enormous, surprisingly light bills let them reach fruit that smaller birds cannot, and the seeds they carry become the next generation of the canopy where these great birds fly. The forest follows. The little tree frogs of the warm forests live their whole lives among the leaves, with round sticky pads on their toes that let them cling to the smoothest surface and climb the wettest leaf. Some are so brightly colored that their very brightness is a warning, telling any creature that would eat them that they carry poison in their skin. They call through the warm nights in great choruses, a rising and falling chorus of small voices from every direction in the dark. One of the deep sounds of the rainforest at night. Some creatures of the forest have learned, in a way, to fly without wings. The flying squirrels do not truly fly, but they glide, spreading a loose fold of skin stretched between their front and back legs and sailing from tree to tree through the night air, steering with their flattened tails. They drift silently between the trunks in the dark, covering surprising distances in a single long glide, and land softly on a far tree, never touching the ground at all. There are plants that live upon the trees and take from them. The mistletoe roots not in the soil, but directly into the branches of a tree, drawing water and nourishment from its host while it makes some food of its own. Birds eat its sticky berries and wipe the seeds onto new branches. And so the mistletoe spreads from tree to tree, never touching the earth. A small green world hanging in the bare winter branches. When all the leaves are gone and the lichens, those slow, patient partnerships of fungus and alga, are among the quiet watchmen of the forest's health. Many of them cannot endure dirty air, and so they grow thickly only where the air is clean, where the long beards of lichen hang heavy from the branches. The air is pure. Where they thin and vanish, something is wrong. People have learned to read the health of the very air by looking at which lichens still grow upon the trees, a living measure, written slowly across the bark. In spring, the conifer forests breathe out clouds. The pines and their kin release their pollen in such vast quantities that it drifts on the wind in visible golden clouds, settling like yellow dust on every surface, gathering in the still corners of ponds and puddles. A single tree can release an almost uncountable number of pollen grains, cast upon the wind in the hope that a few will find their way to another tree. The whole forest, for a few weeks, turns the air to gold. And beneath everything, the forest is patient with time in a way that is hard for us to hold in our minds. A forest is not made in a human lifetime. The great trees were seedlings when our grandparents' grandparents were young. The deep soil took 1,000 years to build. The fallen logs will take a century to melt away. Everything in the forest moves at the pace of seasons and centuries, slow and unhurried, indifferent to our short and hurried lives. And there is a deep peace in that slowness, if we let ourselves feel it. For the forest asks nothing of us. It does not hurry. It does not strive. It simply grows and falls and grows again, season upon season, root and leaf and fungus and soil, all woven quietly together beneath the canopy. The light comes down in broken pieces. The water rises through the trunks. The threads spread through the dark soil. The owl drifts silent through the night. And all of it continues, whether we watch or not, whether we sleep or wake. So let the forest hold you now. Let the slow green quiet settle over you. There is nothing to do here, nothing to reach. Only the soft floor beneath the trees and the cool, still air and the small sounds of the night woods, far off and gentle. The moss on the stone, the threads in the soil, the leaves letting go, one by one, drifting down through the dark. Rain beginning, somewhere among the leaves, the soft patter of it on the canopy far above, the smell of the wet earth rising, the trees standing quiet in the dark, water moving slowly through the roots, the owl silent, the fox somewhere soft-footed and gone. Moonlight scattered on the forest floor, the deep, slow breathing of the wood. Quieter now, the wind in the pines. Far away, a single leaf falling, the soft ground, the dark, the trees standing through the night as they have stood through 1,000 nights before, and the forest breathing slow and old and still. Rain on the leaves, moss on the stone, the green dark sleep